Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm Ukrainian Canadian. Today is March 14th, 2025, and let's get to the news and map updates happening in Ukraine and Russia, shall we? So, quick map update, and then I'll talk about the latest developments with regards to the peace talks, as they like to say, between Ukraine, Russia, the United States, and why I still believe that this is just an imitation and this is not a genuine path towards peace, because the Russians are simply not interested in peace. And I'll tell you why. So let's first talk about Kursk, because this is a major development right now. It is very clear now that the Ukrainians have taken the difficult decision of withdrawing out of Kursk oblast. And as you're seeing here, guys, the map clearly indicates that the Ukrainians have been withdrawing in the last few days, getting closer and closer to the border with Sumy Oblast. And so that's going to be the new reality. As you're seeing here, there's going to be a lot of gray in this border area between Sumy Oblast and Kursk. So I think that's going to be the new kind of situation over the next few months. So we know that over the last few months, the Russians had become very desperate to retake Kursk. They had asked the help of North Koreans, which came in the thousands to help the Russians in their meat wave assaults. And so that became very difficult for the Ukrainians, knowing that there wasn't much of a strengthening operation on the Ukrainian side. Yes, there were some small counteroffensives, but the Ukrainians were just trying to hold on to what they were having as the Russians grew stronger and stronger. One of the reasons why the Russians grew stronger, and that is very indicative of the situation in eastern Ukraine, is that they had to transfer a lot of their forces that were meant for their offensive in Pokrovsk to Kursk. And we're clearly seeing now the results of that, because now the Ukrainians have regained, partially, I'm not saying entirely, the initiative in the Pokrovsk area. You're seeing a lot of blue. Again, Deep State doesn't update things very quickly, but it is confirmed that the Ukrainians have been able to retake the village of Shevchenko. So after retaking Pishchane, the Ukrainians launched an offensive in Shevchenko. So we'll have to confirm again. Deep State seems to be kind of late here, but the Ukrainians have been successful at regaining the momentum in the area of Pokrovsk. And now the Russians are not capable of pushing further in this region. That is not to say that they're completely stopped, but the situation in Pokrovsk has been stabilized more or less, because as you're seeing, they had to transfer a lot of their troops and reserves to the Kursk area. Additionally, in Toretsk, that's the same situation. The Ukrainians have been able to mount their own counteroffensive in the last few weeks, to the point that they control the northern sector of Toretsk. Again, Deep State has not updated the map yet, but I believe that in the next few days, perhaps a week, we're going to see some new updates from the Toretsk front. But one thing is clear, is that the Russians in this sector are not in the offensive anymore, or they're not capable of mounting massive offensives like they did back in 2024. So that is the positive side. And you're seeing that they had to sacrifice one front line to retake Kursk entirely. And let's not forget the fact that they asked for North Korea's help to retake the Kursk Oblast. Now, with some last pointers I want to give you guys with regards to this operation, I still see a lot more good than bad. Again, this allowed the Ukrainians to surprise the Russians, to break that myth that Russia cannot be invaded. A nuclear power can never be invaded by a non-nuclear power. It destabilized the Putin regime. It embarrassed him, quite frankly. Tens of thousands of Russians had to flee and become refugees for many months. And most importantly, rather than seeing Ukrainian cities being devastated and bombed, it was Russian villages and cities that were getting bombed by the Russian military. Because we know that there was a lot of intel that the Russians were planning an offensive in this general direction back in the summer of 2024, as they had done another offensive in Kharkiv in 2024 in the spring of last year, and they were planning for another one to stretch out the Ukrainian defense. So the Ukrainians pulled out a reverse, and they attacked the Russians first. And so that's the biggest positive here, is that the bombing, the destruction happened on Russian territory rather than on the Ukrainian territory. It would have happened no matter what, as the Russians were planning this operation on their end. So that's the situation with Kursk and the Pokrovsk area, we're seeing that the Ukrainians are regaining the initiative. Not entirely. There's still certain front lines, as you're seeing, guys, in the south of Pokrovsk, more towards Velika Novosilka. The Russians are doing small pushes here. They're gaining some ground, but it's nothing like what we've seen back in the summer, fall, and winter of 2024, where they seem to be on a roll. But I'm seeing more and more that the Russians are getting to an exhaustion point here. And there's no surprise why. I've shared so many videos and images of Russians using donkeys, horses, even tricycles and bicycles to move logistics to the front line. I mean, they're very desperate right now, and they're in dire need of armored vehicles. And so that it will only get worse as time goes by. And the Russians, in my personal opinion, are not going to have the same gains as they did back last year. So that's the update with regards to the latest map changes on the front line. Another update I want to give you guys, a quick one, is I shared with you yesterday an image of Tuapse. So this is a coastal city by the Black Sea in the Caucasus, and the Ukrainians struck Tuapse. But why I'm putting a highlight on this city is because, well, first of all, the Ukrainians managed to damage an oil depot in this sector of the city. But the most important thing is there was a video that was shared which clearly showcased that this was not just a Ukrainian drone that struck this oil depot, but it was a Ukrainian missile, or at least some sort of missile, likely to be a homemade Ukrainian missile. We've been talking about in the last few months the new homemade missiles that Ukraine has been producing or developing, including the Palyanetsia, Peklo, the Trambita. There's many other types of cruise missiles and missiles that Ukraine has been not only developing but now producing. And it seems to be clear that this time you could hear in the videos that the locals were sharing a jet sound. So this was clearly some sort of missile being used by Ukraine. Where I'm not sure is if it was a Western missile provided to Ukraine or a Ukrainian missile. I'm more inclined to believe that it was Ukrainian because we had no news of scalps and storm shadows being transferred to Ukraine recently. So I'm inclined to believe that now Ukraine is producing its own missiles and is capable of using them against Russian targets. If that is the case, this is very bad news for the Russians. We already know that they're struggling as it is with Ukrainian long-range drones, which are slow, which are easy to detect, to intercept. With cruise missiles, it's a whole different game. They're much faster. They carry much heavier payloads sometimes. So this allows the Ukrainians to do far better operations and more destructive operations on Russian territory. So all of this to say that this is excellent news, and we'll see more oil refineries, more oil depots, more military bases on fire over the next few months, and that's always great news. Now, the last thing I want to cover is the peace talks. Because, again, we know that there were discussions in Saudi Arabia a few days ago. And what was concluded, now, Deep State doesn't showcase Saudi Arabia on the map, but that doesn't matter. So the Ukrainian delegation met with the American delegation in Saudi Arabia. They agreed on a 30-day ceasefire as long as Russia would do the same. And so the ball was on Russia's territory. And what we saw today is pretty much the predictable reaction that I was expecting. I did a live stream with you guys on Tuesday where I talked about different scenarios, where the most likely one that I anticipated was that the Russians would accept, but with several conditions of their own. And so that's exactly what Putin is currently proposing. In the meeting that they had with the US delegation in Moscow, the Russians pretty much proposed that we're ready for peace talks, but Ukraine cannot be militarized during that 30-day ceasefire. Ukraine cannot mobilize soldiers. Ukraine cannot receive any weapons assistance. Ukraine can never be part of NATO. Western troops can never be part of any peacekeeping operation Ukraine anyways. Basically, it's saying yes, but no by the Russians. And their condition is pretty much, we're ready for peace, except Ukraine needs to capitulate first. So what matters now, and that's a huge question mark, one that I cannot give you guys the answer, is, how is Trump going to react now, knowing that clearly the Russians are not willing to accept this ceasefire with good faith. And so is Trump going to follow through with more sanctions on Russia and continue providing weapons assistance to Ukraine? It seems to be that he's heading that towards that general direction. But again, I share with you guys today a Truth Social post by Putin, fruit and slip here, but by Trump, basically spewing Russian propaganda saying that the Ukrainians are surrounded in Kursk and they will be massacred. And I asked Putin to spare their lives. One of the biggest massacres since World War II. I mean, this is really unhinged coming from the president of the United States, which has access to the best intelligence in the world. And he still decides to trust Putin's word rather than the word of his own intelligence. So there's a lot of question marks here, and you guys can let me know in the comment section what you think is going to be next here, because it's such an up and down road with Trump, unfortunately. And what I'm seeing more is that likely Trump could try to seek a way out of this and say, this is not my fault. I tried everything I could. And he'll blame, of course, Ukraine and Europe because they sabotaged his peace talks, that they weren't playing in good faith. And Russia, my dear friend Putin, he was willing. So I'm seeing more and more the signs that maybe over the next few months, because of their frustration, because of course Trump is very good friends with Putin, that he'll shift the blame on Ukraine and Europe and completely withdraw from the peace talks and put all the responsibility and accountability on Ukraine and Europe, and could potentially, in a matter of few months, also withdraw completely aid and intelligence to Ukraine. We have to expect nowadays the worst case scenario, because we see how much influence Putin holds over Trump, that Trump simply isn't even taking into account the intelligence being shared to him by his own intelligence services. And I think it really showcases as well the level of distrust that Trump has over his own institutions. Probably there's a bunch of propaganda about the American deep state, and so he probably believes more in the Russian intelligence than his own. It's absolutely crazy what's going on right now. So that's the update I want to give you guys with regards to the map changes. You guys can let me know what you think about it, about the peace talks. And again, a huge thank you for your support. If you guys enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. Leave me a comment, and I will see you guys in the next one. Slava Ukraini!